mystery of Cleopatra's tomb. The air in the basement of the Alexandria Library's Rare Manuscripts Division was not just still, it was ancient. It had been breathed by scholars for 2 millennia, settling into a permanent papery suspension. Dr. Layla Sharif felt it coat her throat as she gently unrolled the brittle papyrus. The text was a merchant's ledger, mundane, detailing shipments of olive oil and linen from Thebes. But it was the scrap used to mend a tear that stopped her heart. It was a fragment of a much older document, written in a hurried, informal Greek hand. It spoke not of goods, but of a procession under the weeping moon, of a burden of immeasurable sorrow, taken from the city, not towards the traditional royal necropolis, but west, towards the forgotten lakes and the shifting marshlands of Mariotis. Her finger, clad in a nitrile glove, trembled slightly as it hovered over the glyphs she had transcribed in her notebook. Cleopatras, Philopata, Soma, Nekros Anthropos, Talamon Krypton and Teilui. Cleopatra Philopator. Body. The dead man. A hidden chamber in the silt. The dead man. That was the chilling, colloquial phrase. Not the Queen's consort, not Marcus Antonius. The dead man. As if his identity was secondary to his state, a mere piece in a far grander, more desperate puzzle. Layla was an archaeologist of the written word, not the dug earth. Her world was ink and faded fibre, not trowels and stratigraphy. Yet, this fragment, this 2,000-year-old whisper, pulled at something deeper than academic curiosity. It spoke of a deliberate, terrifying act of disappearance. It contradicted everything Suetonius and Dio Cassius had penned decades later, their histories shaped by Roman victors. They claimed Octavian had allowed the lovers to be buried together, a magnanimous, politic gesture. This scrap, contemporary, frantic, suggested otherwise. It suggested a secret so profound it had to be swallowed by the very landscape. Her initial publication in the Journal of Hellenistic Studies was met with the expected, dry skepticism. A compelling interpretative possibility, wrote one peer. The fragment's provenance and its repair function raised significant questions about its contextual validity, noted another. But the email that arrived a week later was not from academia. It was from a man named Calen Vance, the Marsh of the Two Skies. The message was brief, referencing a geographical feature not named in her public paper, a detail she had kept private, deduced from cross-referencing the fragment with obscure Roman-era irrigation maps. Dr. Sharif, it read, "Your dead man points to a living truth. The silt does not keep secrets. It transforms them. I have seen the pottery that sings of a sky burial under the earth. If you wish to see beyond the page, meet me at the old phosphate docks, Al Max, tomorrow at sunset. Come alone if you value the silence of the past. It was reckless, possibly insane." Al Max was a crumbling, industrial fringe of the city. Yet, the phrase pottery that sings was a specific, maddening reference to a theory she'd only ever explored in her dissertation. The use of resonant acoustic ceramics in late Ptolemaic II architecture. How could he know? The phosphate docks were a skeleton of rust and creosote, jutting into a turquoise sea that seemed too vibrant for such decay. Layla stood, feeling conspicuously academic in her linen shirt and trousers. The sunset was a violent smear of orange and purple. "You read the signs, but you don't yet believe the landscape." The voice came from behind a rusted capstan. Calen Vance emerged, He was perhaps 50, with the sun-leathered skin of someone who lived outdoors and eyes of a startling pale grey that seemed to see the world in layers. He wore practical, stained cargo pants and a faded shirt. He was not an academic. He was a finder. "You referenced the singing shards," Layla said, refusing to be startled. "That's not public knowledge." "It is if you've held one," he replied, his voice low and gravelly. "Found it 10 years ago, in a smuggler's cache in Siwa. A small ostracon, a pottery shard, with a text in Demotic and Greek. It wasn't a text to be read, Doctor. It was a text to be heard. When struck, it emitted a pure, haunting tone. The inscription said it was a keynote for the chamber of the double horizon. It spoke of a tomb where the sky above and the sky below, the Egyptian duality of the heavens and the underworld, were mirrored. A tomb for a goddess queen who refused the Roman ground. Layla's mind raced. The double horizon, Akhbit in Egyptian, a theological concept of perfect symmetry between the mortal and divine realms. And it mentioned the marsh. Not directly. It gave bearings. A bearing from the temple of Taposiris Magna, but not to the temple itself. A bearing to a point where the Nile's tear meets the sea's sigh. I've spent a decade surveying the Mareotis region with magnetometers, ground-penetrating radar, sonar. The marsh is a palimpsest. Roman villas, early Christian monasteries, Napoleonic fortifications, all atop each other. But there's a void, a deep geometric anomaly about 3 kilometers inland from here, near the old Roman canal. It doesn't match any known structure. It's quiet, acoustically dead. A void, Layla whispered. The ultimate hiding place. Not a monumental pyramid, but an absence. A cut in the earth, lined with stone, and buried by the deliberate, patient work of a loyal few and the relentless silt of the marsh. The fragment you found, Kaelin continued. It's the final piece, the human element, the why. Octavian didn't allow a grand burial. He wanted her body paraded in his triumph. Her suicide was a political catastrophe for him, so her most trusted servants, Charmian and Iris perhaps, they didn't just help her die. They helped her vanish. They took the bodies, or maybe just her body, and they hid it where no Roman, no triumphant emperor would ever think to look. Not in a grand tomb, but in the sucking, anonymous mud of a working marshland. A tomb that was not a monument, but a secret. The theory was audacious, heretical, and thrilling. It made psychological, political sense. You want to excavate the void. I want you to validate the void, he corrected. I have resources, private backing, discreet. But I need a historian. Someone who can read the story in the soil, as well as the scroll. This isn't just a hole in the ground. It's a last act of defiance. We need to understand its language. He extended a hand, calloused and strong. Help me listen to what the silt has to say. The dig was a model of clandestine efficiency. Kaelin's backer, whom he referred to only as the patron, had procured permits of questionable authenticity, but impressive official seals. Their camp was a cluster of nondescript prefab huts, set up on the fringe of an agricultural co-op, miles from the anomaly. The team was small. Kaelin, Layla, a brilliant, silent geophysicist named Samir, and 2 rugged brothers from the Fayum, Ayman and Bassem, who operated the heavy machinery with an artist's touch. The anomaly itself, when they finally stood over it, was underwhelming. It was a patch of slightly sunken, reedy ground in a vast expanse of similar ground. The magnetometer readings, however, told a different story. 30 feet below was a perfect rectangle, approximately 10 by 15 meters, of non-magnetic material, likely limestone. Its roof seemed to be collapsed in one section. Surrounding it was a chaotic swirl of metallic signatures, old iron, bronze, as if the area had been a dumping ground. The Romans came looking, Kalen said, pointing at the screen. See this scatter? Spearheads, hobnails from Caligay, a few denarii from the reign of Augustus. They probed the area. They knew she was hidden out here somewhere. But the marsh fought back. The more they dug, the more the water and mud flowed in. They failed. They left their trash and their frustration behind. The first week of excavation was a battle against the environment. They sank a series of boreholes, extracting cores of sediment. Layla, her hands now dirty, learned to read the cores like historical texts. Layers of clay, layers of sand, a stratum rich with Roman-era pottery shards, then a layer of clean, waterborne silt. Then, at a depth of 28 feet, the auger bit struck something that wasn't mud. It brought up a core containing fragments of pink Aswan granite. A facing stone, Samir said, his voice barely a whisper. From a royal structure. The decision was made to sink a surgical excavation shaft at the edge of the rectangular signature. The machinery worked day and night, the rhythmic thumping of the diesel pump, a constant companion as they battled the groundwater. Layla spent her days cataloguing every artifact from the spoil heaps. Roman military issue, yes, but also earlier pieces. A faience Ushabti from the 26th dynasty, a Hellenistic oil lamp depicting Harpocrates. The site was a crossroads, a place already ancient when Cleopatra was born. Then, on the 11th day, Amon's shout cut through the din. The excavator bucket had scraped against a worked stone surface. They switched to hand tools. Layla rappelled down the slick metal ladder into the cool, damp shaft. The world above reduced to a circle of blinding white sky. There, in the beam of her headlamp, was a wall. Not rough stone, but finely jointed limestone blocks, each the size of a man's torso. The mortar between them was a dark, resinous compound. She scraped a sample. It smelled of pine tar and beeswax, a waterproofing agent. This was not a haphazard burial. This was engineered. Look here, Kalen called from a few feet away. He was brushing mud from the wall's surface. Under the grime, a symbol emerged. A faint, carved wedge's eye, the Eye of Horus. Below it, in elegant, minute Greek script, Thea Neotera, Thea Neotera, the younger goddess. One of Cleopatra's epithets. Layla felt the weight of the centuries press in on her. They were here. They were touching the wall of her hiding place. The next 48 hours were a fever dream. They carefully exposed a corner of the structure. The roof was collapsed, but not from natural decay. The limestone slabs were fractured inward, as if struck with tremendous force. A Roman digging probe, Kalen deduced, tracing the fracture lines. They found the roof. They tried to break in. But look at the sediment inside the break. He shone his light. The limestone fall was embedded not in loose mud, but in a hard, concrete-like matrix. They hit a countermeasure. The chamber was flooded, probably with a slurry of quicklime and natron. It would have solidified rapidly, sealing the breach and dissolving anything organic within. A final, terrible safeguard. The hope of finding an intact burial chamber, of golden sarcophagi and jeweled regalia, evaporated. This was not a treasury. It was a fortress of oblivion. They decided to risk a small endoscopic camera through a gap in the collapsed roof. pushing past the hardened slurry. The monitor flickered to life in the dim tent above ground. The images were murky, swirling with suspended silt. The camera pushed forward, lights piercing the gloom. It revealed chaos. Shattered pottery, amphorae, alabaster jars littered a floor of cracked black basalt. The walls were lined with niches. Many collapsed. And then the camera panned, and Layla gasped. In the center of the chamber, not on a bier, but half submerged in the grey, cement-like slurry, was a sarcophagus. It was made of dark, hard stone, granodiorite. Its lid was askew, cracked cleanly across the middle. The camera's light glinted on something within. "Bring it closer," Layla breathed. The image resolved. Inside the sarcophagus, there was no pristine mummy. Instead, there was a jumble of bone and something else. A desiccated, leathery form, partially wrapped in the tattered, blackened remnants of linen. And upon the head, unmistakable even in its ruin, was a modious crown. The cylindrical crown of an Egyptian goddess, inlaid with what looked like faded blue faience and tiny, dull golden stars. Beside the body, partially crushed by the fallen lid, was a smaller, simpler wooden coffin, long since rotted, containing another skeletal figure. A man. A ring on a skeletal finger bore a Roman intaglio. An image of Hercules, a favourite emblem of Marcus Antonius. But it was the main body that held their gaze. Around the neck was a thick torque of gold, ending in serpent heads. And clutched in the skeletal hand was a small, sealed cylindrical casket of solid hematite. "She's here," Kalen said, his voice thick with emotion. "And she's not alone." But they didn't make it to a peaceful afterlife. The Roman breach triggered the flood. The quicklime slurry. It would have been a horrific end, even for the dead. A second death. Layla felt a profound and unexpected sorrow. This was not a glorious discovery. It was a tragedy, preserved in chemical concrete. The most famous woman in history, reduced to a grim puzzle in a flooded hole. The hematite casket was the only object that seemed potentially intact. It was her priority. After intense debate, they devised a plan to extract it using a remote manipulator arm. The process took a day of nerve-wracking precision. When the casket finally emerged into the tent, it was smaller than it had seemed on screen. About the size of a scroll case, heavy and cold. Under light, with Samir documenting, Layla prepared to open it. The seal was a simple wax plug, stamped with a signet. A crescent moon, a star. Isis. She broke it carefully. Inside, protected from the slurry, was a tight roll of the finest vellum, impossibly preserved, and with it, 2 withered, blackened flowers. A rose and a sprig of laurel. With trembling, gloved hands, Layla unrolled the vellum. It was not papyrus, but the more durable calf skin. The writing was in multiple hands, multiple languages, elegant, formal Greek, flowing, cursive demotic, and a few lines of Latin. She began to read aloud, her voice trembling. In the 22nd year of the reign of Cleopatra, Thea Philopator, the younger goddess, in the month of Mesore, under a hidden moon. This is the testament of Charmian, handmaiden of Isis. The Lord Antony is dead by his own hand, deceived by false tidings. My lady has determined to follow him. Caesar Octavianus approaches the city. He seeks her for his triumph. He will parade her in golden chains through the streets of Rome. This cannot be. We have prepared the chamber of the double horizon, dug in secret in the land of the shifting waters. known only to the priest of Taposiris, and to us. It is not a palace for eternity, but a cloak of earth. Better to be one with the mud of Egypt than a spectacle for Rome. She has taken the ASP, the servant of the sun. She died with grace, placing it upon her breast. We, Iras and I, have placed the royal diadem upon her brow. The serpent talk at her throat. We have laid her with her lord, though his body is broken with grief. We have sealed the chamber with the sacred slurry, that it may petrify and guard its own. But before the final seal, I write this. Let it be known that she chose her end. She chose the darkness of her own land over the false light of his triumph. She is Isis, seeking Osiris, not a queen yielding to an emperor. We have done our duty. The entrance is drowned. The marsh will forget. May the gods of the two horizons, the visible and the unseen, receive them, and may any who find this know, you have not found a treasure. You have found a grave. Respect its silence. Iras has already taken her own life. I will join her now. There is no more Egypt for us. Let the silt take all. The tent was utterly silent. The hum of the generator outside seemed to fade away. They were no longer archaeologists. They were witnesses to a private, sacred, and devastating farewell. The mystery, Layla finally said, her eyes wet, was never where she was. It was why she was there. The mystery was her choice, and the lengths to which her people went to honor it. Kaelin looked at the monitor, at the grim image of the shattered chamber. The Romans breached it, triggered the slurry. They saw that. They saw the desecration their own pursuit had caused. And they left. They sealed the story, out of shame, or superstition, or both. They wrote the official history of a dignified burial, because the truth was too awful. Layla carefully re-rolled the vellum. The flowers crumbled to dust at her touch. This changes nothing, and everything. We won't have crowns to put in a museum. We have a story, a true one. What do we do? Samir asked quietly. Layla looked at Kaelin. The finder's eyes were on the dark monitor screen. He had spent a decade searching for a queen. He had found a tragedy. We document, Layla said, her voice firming with conviction. We document everything with absolute precision. We photograph, sample, map, and then we reseal it. Kaelin finished, his voice a low rumble. We fill the shaft. We let the marsh have her back. The patron wanted glory. He wanted a headline. But this doesn't belong to a collector or a museum vault. Charmian was right. It's a grave. The decision was unanimous. Over the next week, they worked with a solemn, funereal purpose. They took only the vellum scroll, the hematite casket, and a few small diagnostic samples for analysis. They took thousands of photographs, laser scans of the chamber, core samples of the slurry. They created a complete record of the tomb of the double horizon. On the final night, under a weeping moon that mirrored the one described in Layla's original fragment, they began the process of backfilling the shaft. The machinery roared, but it felt like a rite. They were not hiding history. They were reconsecrating a sanctuary. Layla stood at the edge, holding the hematite casket. She had made a decision. She knelt and placed it back into the excavation, letting it slide into the dark, returning it to its guardian. "Ach, Bit," she whispered, "may you find your horizon." As the first load of clean fill thundered into the shaft, she turned away. The official report they would file would speak of an interesting hydraulic feature and inconclusive Roman-era debris. Their private, complete archive would be placed in a secure digital vault, with instructions for release in a century's time. The mystery of Cleopatra's tomb was solved, not with a fanfare of gold, but with the quiet echo of a servant's last words in the dark. The greatest treasure was not found in the silt, but in the choice it preserved. The choice of a queen to belong only to Egypt, to vanish into its myth and its mud, forever beyond the grasp of Rome. The mystery was not a location. It was an act of love, despair, and ultimate defiance. And now, once more, he would sleep under the marsh. A secret kept not by stone, but by the conscience of those who finally understood it. The silence in the rare manuscript's division was no longer pregnant with possibility. It was heavy with a secret too immense to share. Layla Sharif sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop screen the only light in the vast subterranean space. The digital archive was complete. Terabytes of laser-scanned point clouds, spectral imaging of the vellum scroll, micro-CT scans of the slurry samples, and thousands of high-resolution photographs. It was a ghost in a machine, a perfect, sterile echo of the tragedy in the mud. She had named the archive Project Akbit. Officially, she'd published a dry, deliberately dull paper in a minor regional journal. Subsurface anomalies and Roman military debris in the western Mareotis, a hydrological assessment. It mentioned pottery, a few spearheads, and postulated a flooded Roman engineering outpost. It was a masterful piece of misdirection, and it was met with the profound disinterest she had hoped for. The academic world had glanced at it, yawned, and moved on. Calen Vance had vanished as completely as the tomb. A single, untraceable email had arrived a month after the backfill was complete. The patron is dissatisfied. He wanted a trophy. He believes we failed. Be careful, Layla. Some silences are more valuable than others. The message was unsigned, but the cadence was his. For 6 months she tried to return to her old life. She lectured on Ptolemaic trade routes. She authenticated papyri. She drank bad coffee with colleagues. But the memory of the damp air in the shaft, the glint of the modious crown in the endoscopic gloom, and the elegant, despairing hand of Charmian haunted her. She had solved the greatest historical mystery of the ancient world, and she had buried it. It felt right. It felt sacred. And yet, it was a constant, whispering pressure behind her eyes. The first crack in the silence appeared on a Tuesday. A courier delivered a small, secure package to her university office. Inside, nestled in anti-static foam, was a single ceramic ostracan, a potsherd about the size of a palm. It was fired clay, reddish-brown, with a few lines of faded black ink in demotic script. But it was not the text that made her blood run cold. It was the faint, almost imperceptible series of notches carved along one edge. She knew those notches. They were a resonant scale pattern, a match for the singing shard Calen had described a lifetime ago at the phosphate docks. There was no note, no return address. The postmark was from Istanbul. With trembling hands, she took a small metal stylus from her desk drawer. Holding the ostracon by its edges, she gently tapped the first notch. A clear, pure tone, like a tiny silver bell, resonated in the quiet office. It was an otherworldly sound, a vibration that seemed to belong to a different density of air. She tapped the next. A second tone, a perfect fifth above. A scale, a key. This isn't a text to be read. It is a text to be heard. Kaelin's words echoed. But Kaelin was gone. Who had this? And why send it to her? That night, in the securest corner of her apartment, she accessed the Akbit archive. She cross-referenced the demotic on the new shard. It was a fragment of a ritual chant to Isis, protector of the dead. But it also contained a topographical reference she hadn't noticed before, a mention of the facing stone that mirrors the heart of the city. A mirror, a reflection, the double horizon. A cold dread began to form in her stomach. The tomb they found was a decoy, an incredibly elaborate, heart-wrenchingly real decoy. It contained the bodies, or what remained of them, and the final, desperate testament of the handmaidens. But the chamber of the double horizon was a theological concept of perfect symmetry. If there was a sky below, a reflection of the heavens in the underworld, then perhaps the tomb, too, had a reflection. What if the marsh tomb was the earthly horizon? What if there was another, a celestial horizon, meant to hold not the body, but the ka, the spirit, a cenotaph, not for hiding, but for worship? Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She pulled up the geophysical surveys of the wider Mariotis region from the dig. She had been so focused on the void, she'd ignored a subtler pattern. About 5 kilometers east, on a rare, slight limestone ridge that would have been a promontory overlooking the marsh in antiquity, was another anomaly. Not a void, but a dense, concentrated mass. It was smaller, deeper, and had been dismissed by Samir as a natural geologic formation. A nodule of ironstone, perhaps, but viewed through the lens of symbolic symmetry, its position was precise. A straight line drawn from the center of the marsh void through the axis of the main canal pointed directly to this dense anomaly on the ridge. It was on the eastern side, the side of the rising sun, of rebirth. The body in the west, in the setting sun, in the realm of the dead. The spirit in the east, awaiting the dawn. The facing stone that mirrors the heart of the city, she whispered. Alexandria's heart was the royal quarter, the palaces. This ridge would have had a direct sightline to the city's great lighthouse, the Pharos. A mirror. The package was a breadcrumb. Someone else knew. Someone who understood the symbolism better than she did. And they were guiding her, or testing her. Her university email was compromised. She was sure of it. She created a new, encrypted account and sent a single message to Samir, the geophysicist, using a code they'd established during the dig. A subject line about sediment porosity levels. Needed discreet relook at anomaly Theta 7. Confidential. Urgent. His reply came 12 hours later. Theta 7 shows layered density. Not natural. Possible chambered structure. High metal content. Gold. Gold. The spirit required sustenance. Eternal and incorruptible. The body could be given to the dissolving mud. But the car needed a house of eternity, a house of gold. The second intrusion was more violent. 2 days later, her apartment was burgled. It was professional, surgical. Nothing obvious was taken. No TV, no laptop. But her filing cabinet, where she kept her original handwritten notes from the dig, had been picked. The notes themselves were there, but she could tell they had been photographed. A faint smudge of a different type of dust on the cover. They were looking for corroboration, for the human intuition that wasn't in the digital archive. She felt the walls closing in. The patron, a rival archaeologist, a government agency. The motivations were a blur. But the threat was clear. The silence they had created was cracking. Driven by equal parts fear, responsibility, and a consuming, renewed curiosity, she knew she had to act. She couldn't involve the authorities without exposing everything. She packed a small bag with rugged clothing, a multi-tool, a powerful flashlight, and a handheld GPS. She withdrew cash. She was going to the ridge. The site was remote, part of a struggling olive grove owned by an absentee landlord. Using Samir's coordinates, she found the spot as dusk bled into a star-sprinkled night. The air was dry here, smelling of thyme and dust, a world away from the damp of the marsh. She used a small, handheld ground-penetrating radar unit Samir had loaned her, a piece of tech far beyond her purview. The screen painted a picture. 15 feet down, a small rectangular chamber, about 4 meters square. Above it, the soil signature showed a collapse, an old infill. And within the chamber, bright, hyper-reflective spots. Samir was right. Metal. A lot of it. It was not a dig for a team. This was a probe. She marked the spot, and under the cover of darkness, began to dig a narrow vertical inspection shaft with a compact folding shovel. The work was brutal, the soil rocky. Her hands blistered, her muscles screamed. She was an academic, not a field hand. But the ghost of Charmian and the cold fear of the unknown watchers drove her. By midnight, she hit a capstone. Not limestone, but a single slab of black basalt, intricately carved. She cleared enough space to see a portion of the carving. It was a celestial chart, the constellations of the Mediterranean sky, but with one addition, a brilliantly etched star between Virgo and Leo. Sirius, the star of Isis. The lid itself was the sky. There was no way to move it alone. But at one corner, she found a crack where the stone had settled and fractured. She wedged the shovel tip in and levered. With a gritty groan, a triangular fragment of the basalt broke free, tumbling into the darkness below. A breath of air, ancient, dry, and scented with myrrh and decay, wafted up. She shone her flashlight into the hole. The beam cut through 2,000 years of stagnant darkness. It illuminated not a sarcophagus, but a shrine. The walls were lined with thin sheets of hammered gold, etched with scenes from the Book of the Dead. In the center of the small chamber stood a life-sized statue. It was Cleopatra, but not as the Greek ruler. She was carved from obsidian, depicted as the goddess Isis, seated on a throne, nursing a small figure of Horus. The obsidian was inlaid with lapis lazuli for the eyes, carnelian for the lips. It was breathtaking, a masterpiece of late Ptolemaic art. At the statue's feet was an altar of alabaster, and upon the altar lay objects. A golden diadem of uraei, far more elaborate than the one in the marsh. A collar of pectoral jewels, a scepter of ivory and gold, and a stack of papyrus codices, sealed in wax, their edges gleaming with gold leaf. This was the cenotaph, the house of the Ka. This is where the cult of the deified Cleopatra was meant to continue, in secret, after the Roman conquest, a place for her spirit to reside, fed by ritual and precious offerings. It was untouched. The Romans never found it. A wave of awe washed over her, followed immediately by a tidal wave of terror. This was infinitely more valuable, more vulnerable than the grim marsh tomb. This was art, history, spirit, and she was alone, with a hole in the sky. As she was lowering a small camera on a wire through the opening, the sound of an engine cut through the night. headlights, off-road, bouncing over the rough terrain. They were coming fast. She killed her flashlight, plunging herself into utter blackness. She crouched in her shallow, dirty hole next to the broken basalt sky. The vehicle skidded to a halt nearby. Doors opened and closed. Boots crunched on gravel. The signal came from here. She's found something. The voice was guttural, accented, not Egyptian. The patron wants confirmation before extraction. A second voice replied, calmer, colder. He's tired of failures. He wants the coordinates and the prize. Layla's heart hammered against her ribs. He tagged her. The GPR unit. Her phone. It didn't matter. She was trapped. A beam of a high-powered flashlight swept the grove, passing over her hiding place. She held her breath. Over here. Fresh dig. The boots came closer. She could see the light dancing above her. In a moment, they would look down. Then, from the other side of the ridge, a sharp metallic clang echoed, like a shovel striking rock. The beams of light whipped away. There! Go! The boots thudded away into the darkness. A moment later, a shout, a scuffle, a grunt of pain. Then, silence. Layla waited, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. Then, a soft whisper from the edge of her hole. Dr. Sharif. Time to go. She knew that gravelly voice. She looked up. Silhouetted against the starlight was the familiar, lean frame of Calen Vance. He extended a hand. How did you... Later, he said, his voice tight. They're stunned, not out. And there will be more. We need to seal this and disappear. Now. With his strength, they maneuvered the broken basalt fragment back into place as best they could, then frantically backfilled the shaft, scattering brush over the disturbed earth. It was a pathetic camouflage, but it would have to do. The car is half a mile east. Walk quietly. They moved through the night like ghosts. When they reached his vehicle, a battered, anonymous jeep, he finally spoke. The patron is a consortium, Layla. Antiquities traffickers, backed by a private collector with a god complex in the Gulf. They funded the marsh dig. When we came back with nothing but stories, they thought we were lying, hiding the loot. They've been monitoring you ever since. I've been monitoring them. You knew about the cenotaph, she accused, her voice shaking with adrenaline and anger. I suspected. The Singing Shard scale was a map, a harmonic map. I deciphered it just before we found the marsh tomb. But when we found what we found, it felt like the end of the story. I thought it was enough. I was wrong. The Patron's experts kept working on the shard. They figured it out too. That ostracon they sent you was a taunt, a test to see if you'd lead them to the real prize. And I did, she said, sickened. We have to protect it, he said, his eyes on the dark road. Not just from them, from everyone. If this gets out, the ridge will be torn apart by 100 factions. The statue alone is priceless. It would vanish into a vault in some palace, and the context, the meaning, would be lost forever. What do we do? The question was becoming a dreadful refrain. Calen was silent for a long moment. We use their greed against them. We give the patron a prize. He outlined his plan. It was audacious and dangerous. They would forge a trail. Using her knowledge and his connections in the shadowy world of artifact recovery, they would create a convincing fiction that Dr. Sharif, disillusioned and greedy, had secretly located and looted the cenotaph. They would leak coordinates to a fake site, a deep underwater cave near Taposiris Magna. They would plant a convincing replica of the obsidian Isis statue, an expensive but obtainable undertaking, using traditional craftsmen he knew in a secured location there. They would let the patron's men discover this, fight over it, and ultimately recover it. Meanwhile, they would create a different kind of archive for the true cenotaph. Not a digital one, but a physical, distributed one. They would enlist Samir and a few other utterly trusted individuals. A master goldsmith in Cairo, a Coptic historian in Asyut, a marine archaeologist in Alexandria. Each would be given a piece of the puzzle, the precise celestial alignments, the chemical composition of the altar offerings, the textual themes from the codices which they would need to briefly, secretly access and photograph. Each would hold their piece in trust, unaware of the whole, with instructions to release their data only upon a specific, triggering event, or after their deaths. The true location would be protected by silence and by a deadly deterrent. The story they would spread would be that the cenotaph was rigged with Ptolemaic-era poison traps, a myth that would gain credibility after the patron's prize was found to be curiously, mysteriously contaminated with a non-lethal but frightening synthetic toxin. We make the truth more dangerous to possess than to ignore, Kalin said. It took 3 months of shadow work. Layla lived in a state of constant, low-grade fear, moving between safe houses, communicating only through encrypted channels. She saw the news report, a dramatic raid by international heritage authorities on a smuggling boat off Taposiris, recovering a priceless Ptolemaic statue. The photograph was blurry, but the replica was perfect. The patron, it seemed, had been thwarted by the authorities, a narrative Kalin had also carefully seeded. The collector would be furious, but his cover was blown, his operation scattered. One evening, Layla received a final package. Inside was a small, perfect photograph of the obsidian Isis statue in its chamber, bathed in soft light. On the back, in Kalin's hand, Akbit is safe. The horizon is closed. Live in the visible world now, Doctor. It needs you. She never saw or heard from him again. Layla returned to the library, to the dust and the papyrus. But she was changed. She now carried 2 tombs within her, one of dissolving sorrow in the marsh, and one of luminous, frozen hope in the ridge. She understood that Cleopatra's final mystery was not one, but twofold. It was the ultimate expression of the Egyptian soul, the body and the spirit, divided yet connected. One sacrificed to the brutal realities of history, the other secreted away in a dream of eternity. She wrote a new book, not an excavation report, but a historical biography of Cleopatra VII, drawing on the totality of her understanding. It became a classic, praised for its profound empathy and its evocative sense of place. In the final chapter, she wrote, "Perhaps the greatest leaders understand that their power lies not in the monuments that bear their name, but in the stories that outlive their stone." Cleopatra's final act was not one of defeat, but of sublime, tragic stagecraft. She exited the world of Rome and history and stepped into the realm of Egypt and myth. She chose to become a mystery, knowing that a mystery is far harder to conquer than a kingdom. Her tomb, wherever it may be, is not a location on a map. It is the space between the lines of history, in the silence after the last word of the chronicler, in the enduring human fascination with a queen who dared to shape her own legend, even in death. The book won awards. Colleagues would sometimes ask, in wistful moments over wine, Do you think we'll ever really find her?" Layla Sharif would smile, a small, secret smile that held the damp of a marsh and the glint of obsidian under a starlit sky. She would take a sip and say, with perfect, truthful ambiguity, "I think she has found the hiding place she always wanted. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be remembered." And in the quiet of her study, she would sometimes take out a single, unassuming reddish-brown potsherd, not to tap its notches and hear its song, but simply to hold it. A key to a door that must remain forever locked. A note in a symphony only the desert wind and the shifting silt would ever fully hear. The mystery was no longer a question. It was a vigil. And she, Layla Sharif, was its keeper. 10 years is a long time to keep a vigil. For Layla Sharif, it was a decade measured not in seasons, but in the quiet, persistent hum of anxiety that never fully left her. She rose to become the head of the Rare Manuscripts Division, her name on the spines of respected biographies, her counsel sought by documentary filmmakers. She was the calm, authoritative voice on Cleopatra, the scholar who spoke of the Queen's political acumen and cultural patronage, steering conversations firmly away from treasure and tombs. She became so adept at deflection that she sometimes wondered if she had convinced herself. The world moved on. New technologies revolutionized archaeology. LiDAR, AI-assisted pattern recognition, isotopic analysis that could trace a mummy's childhood diet. Each advancement made her secret feel more fragile, a papyrus boat on a rising digital sea. The first tremor came from an unexpected direction. The ocean. A massive, multinational underwater survey was launched to map the ancient submerged parts of Alexandria's eastern harbor, a project combining marine archaeologists, roboticists, and geologists. Layla was invited as a historical consultant. It was safe work. The harbor was Roman and Byzantine, a graveyard of sunken palaces and toppled obelisks, far from the western marshes. Then, the project's sonar array pinged back an anomaly on the seafloor, 2 kilometers offshore from the ridge where the cenotaph lay. It was a perfect, circular depression, 50 meters across, with geometric, linear features at its center. The lead marine archaeologist, a jovial Greek named Demetrios, was ecstatic. A sunken rotunda, perhaps a temple to Poseidon, or a lighthouse ancillary. Layla's blood turned to ice water. She knew the geometry. It was the same precise sacred ratio found in the basalt capstone of the cenotaph, the golden mean. This was no temple to Poseidon. As she pored over the bathymetric maps, a horrifying, beautiful symmetry revealed itself. The cenotaph on the ridge, the marsh tomb inland, and this new underwater structure formed a perfect, colossal triangle across the landscape. The points mirrored the 3 peaks of the Great Pyramid of Giza, but translated onto the Alexandrian plain. The body, marsh, the spirit, ridge, and what was the third? The legacy, the memory. The double horizon was not a duality. It was a trinity. The discovery made global news. Potential major Hellenistic structure found off Alexandria. Media frenzy was immediate. Demetrios' team prepared for a manned submersible dive. Layla tried to argue for caution, for more remote sensing, but her objections were seen as scholarly timidity in the face of a thrilling find. The dive was broadcast live online. Layla watched from her office, a knot of dread in her stomach. The submersible, Thetis, descended into the murky green twilight. The circular depression resolved into an artificial crater, as if a giant cup had been pressed into the seabed. At its center stood a structure, a small square podium of white marble, atop which rested a single, massive object draped in centuries of silt and marine growth. The sub's robotic arm, with a gentle puff of water, cleared the sediment. The camera zoomed in. It was a throne, carved from a single block of purple porphyry, the imperial stone of the Roman emperors. It was unmistakably Egyptian in form. On its backrest was a carved, raised relief, the twin crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, flanked by the serpent of Wadjet and the vulture of Nekhbet. But empty. A throne for a ghost, and on the seat, placed with deliberate care, was a simple, sealed alabaster chest, about the size of a shoebox. The commentary in the sub was a burst of static-filled excitement. A votive offering, a ceremonial deposit. Layla knew it was neither. This was the third point, a point of legacy. Not the body, not the spirit, but the symbol of her rule, placed in the mediating element of water. The domain of Isis, the element that connected Egypt to the world. This was Cleopatra's final, breathtaking statement. Even as her physical kingdom fell, her sovereignty was transferred to the eternal sea, beyond the reach of any earthly power. It was a declaration in stone. My kingdom was never just the land. The alabaster chest was carefully retrieved. In the high-security conservation lab on board the research vessel, under the gaze of the world's media, it was opened. Inside, cushioned in desiccated linen, was a library, not papyrus scrolls, but 7 slim wax tablets, the Roman kind used for correspondence. They were sealed, their wooden backings still intact, and with them, a single, exquisite gold signet ring. The seal was a tiny, intricate engraving of a sphinx with the face of Cleopatra. The head conservator, with trembling hands, applied gentle heat to the first tablet. The wax softened. Using a micro spatula, they lifted the sealed cover. The writing within was Latin, in a sharp, efficient, and brutally familiar hand. The first line was a spear to Layla's heart. Marcus Antonius to Cleopatra, Queen of Kings from the field at Actium, 2nd September, 31 BC. It was Antony's last, desperate dispatch before the battle was lost. A personal, raw, strategic document the world never knew existed. The second tablet was Cleopatra's reply, written in her fluent, slightly formal Latin. It was not the letter of a lovesick woman, but of a commander analyzing naval logistics, alliances, and a chillingly pragmatic contingency plan. Should the sea turn against us, the Sol Invictus will carry the essence of our covenant to the deep sanctuary. The tablets were a diplomatic and military archive, the private correspondence of the 2 most powerful people in the Mediterranean in their final days. They spoke of treaties with Median kings, of grain supplies from Cyrenaica, of the loyalty of certain Roman legions. They were history, unmediated by Roman historians. The world went mad. This was bigger than a tomb. This was the secret history of the Western world's turning point. Nations squabbled over ownership. Egypt claimed it as cultural patrimony. Greece, Italy, even Britain cited historical connections. The UN scheduled debates. Demetrios became a celebrity, and Layla saw the trap closing. The alabaster chest was a beacon. It was meant to be found. It was Cleopatra's final, defiant publication. She had hidden her body and her spirit, but she had planted her legacy, like a time capsule in the seabed, knowing the sea would one day give it up. She had outmaneuvered Octavian in the long game of history. But the chest was also a key. The letters contained geographical clues, poetic but decipherable to anyone who understood her mind. References to the hill that watches the drowning palace, the ridge, and the reed bed that drinks the tears of Isis, the marsh. The Trinity was now legible. 3 days after the revelation, Layla found a dead scarab beetle placed precisely in the center of her office keyboard. In ancient symbology, the scarab pushed the sun through the underworld. It was a warning of a journey through darkness. That evening, as she walked to her car in the university's underground garage, a black SUV with mirrored windows pulled up silently beside her. The rear window slid down. A man in an immaculate suit, his face lean and intelligent, regarded her. He had the calm eyes of a predator who never needs to rush. "Dr. Sharif, a pleasure. My name is Aris Thorne. I represent the Kronos Foundation." His voice was smooth, accentless. Kronos was a mythical-level philanthropic entity, funding everything from asteroid mining to longevity research. They were also rumored to be the ultimate patrons of grey market science. "I have nothing to say to you," Layla said, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "Oh, but you have everything to say," Thorne replied, smiling faintly. "You see, we've been following the recent underwater discovery with great interest. Fascinating letters. But they are, forgive me, just the cover. The introduction to the real text." He held up a tablet. On it was a multi-spectral image of one of the wax tablets. The visible text was Antony's, but in the infrared band, underneath the Latin, was a second layer of writing, etched into the wood before the wax was applied. It was in demotic Egyptian, a palimpsest of history, Thorne said, the surface story for Rome to eventually find, the hidden story for those who know how to look. Our algorithms have been busy. The demotic text is a ritual itinerary. It doesn't just hint at locations, Doctor. It gives coordinates. Celestial coordinates for the cenotaph on the night of her death, and hydrological coordinates for the marsh tomb based on Nile flood levels. Cleopatra didn't just hide her legacy. She created a map. And you are the only person alive who has seen 2 of the 3 points. You can validate the data. He leaned forward slightly. The Kronos Foundation believes in preservation through understanding. We wish to document these sites in their entirety, using non-invasive quantum scanning technology we have developed. No digging, no disturbance. A perfect, complete record for humanity. It was a lie. She could feel it. It was the same lie the patron had used a decade ago, polished to a higher sheen. "And if I refuse?" Thorne's smile didn't waver. "The world is on the cusp of a historical renaissance. The letters have ignited a fire. That fire will spread. Amateur enthusiasts, rival agencies, treasure hunters with satellite imagery. They will find the ridge. They will find the marsh. They will tear them apart. We can control the narrative. We can protect the sites with a perimeter of secrecy and technology. Or you can watch them be destroyed in a public frenzy. Your choice." He handed her a sleek, encrypted satellite phone. "Think on it. You have 48 hours. The clock, as they say, has been ticking for 2,000 years. A little longer won't matter. But to us, it does." The window slid up, and the SUV ghosted away. Layla stood in the concrete gloom, the dead scarab in her pocket. He was right about one thing. The discovery of the throne had changed everything. The secret was now a race. Kronos had the map. They just needed the guide. She went home, but not to her apartment. She went to a safe deposit box she had maintained for a decade. Inside, along with a stack of cash and a false passport, was a burner phone. There was only one number in its memory. She hadn't dialed it in 10 years. She wasn't even sure it would work. She pressed call. It rang once, twice. A voice answered, saying nothing. "They found the third point," Layla said, her voice barely a whisper. "The throne in the sea. Kronos has the map beneath the map. They've given me 2 days." There was a long silence on the line, filled with the whisper of what might have been a desert wind. Then Calen Vance's voice, older, drier, but unmistakable. "The Triskelion. I wondered. You knew." A suspicion. A threefold symmetry fit her intellect. Kronos. They're different. They don't want artifacts. They want validation. Validation of what? Of their own model, Calen said cryptically. They believe history is a code, that if you solve a big enough piece, like the complete death ritual of the last divine ruler of the ancient world, you unlock a pattern. A predictive pattern about power, civilization, collapse. They're not collectors. They're coders. And they need the raw data. The tombs are their final data set. The horror deepened. It wasn't about gold or glory. It was about something colder, more abstract, and infinitely more dangerous. Turning history into an algorithm. What do? We give them a tour, Calen said, a hard edge returning to his voice. But on our terms. You will agree. You will guide them to the marsh first. It's already violated, already tragic. Its power is in its story, not its preservation. While you keep them occupied there, I will activate the poison trap protocol at the ridge. We'll make it digitally toxic. And the sea throne, it's already public. It's a shield. But we need to plant a flaw in their data. How? The singing shards, he said, the resonance. Their quantum scanners will be listening to everything. Molecular vibrations, subsurface echoes. We need to feed them a false frequency. A harmonic leads nowhere. Do you still have the ostracon? Yes. Good. At the marsh site, you will need to discover something. A new fragment. One that gives a corrected, full set of coordinates for the ridge. I will get it to you. It will look old. It will feel old. It will sing the wrong song. The plan was insanely complex. A performance of a lifetime. And then we disappeared the truth forever. Not by hiding it, but by burying it under a better, more tragic, more complete story. We will give Kronos, and through their inevitable, leaked report, the world, a magnificent, flawed truth. A narrative so compelling, it will satisfy curiosity for another century. Layla's mind reeled. It was historiography as warfare. You're talking about forging history. No, Calen corrected. I'm talking about continuing what she started. She forged her own exit. We're just protecting the stage she left behind. The next 36 hours were a blur of preparation. A courier delivered a small package to her office. A newly aged ostracon, identical to the first, but with a subtly different series of notches. When tapped, it produced a dissonant, haunting minor chord. The attached demotic text spoke of the corrupted horizon and the sanctuary defiled, pointing to a false location 2 miles south of the true ridge. She called Thorn. I'll guide you. Non-invasive scanning only. I oversee all data interpretation, and we start with the marsh. It's the anchor point. Agreed, Thorn said, sounding pleased. Our team will be ready at dawn. The Kronos team was a disquieting sight. There were no rough-handed diggers. Instead, there were technicians in clean suits, operating silent, tripod-mounted devices that looked like hybrid telescopes and satellite dishes. They scanned the marsh site with beams of structured light and something they called temporal resonance imaging. Thorne watched it all on holographic displays that hovered in the air, showing stunningly detailed 3D models of the submerged chamber, the shattered sarcophagus, the bones. Layla played her part, explaining the historical context, the story of Charmian. She saw the Kronos analysts eating it up, data tagging her every word for their model. Then, on the second day, during a carefully staged stumble, she found the new ostracon half buried near the excavation shaft. The discovery caused a flutter. Thorne insisted it be scanned immediately. Its resonance frequency was recorded, its demotic text translated by their AI. The false coordinates popped up on the main display. Fascinating, Thorne murmured, his eyes glittering with data hunger. A corrective. The original ridge site was a decoy within a decoy. She was even more ingenious than we thought. He bought it. The story of a defiled sanctuary was more dramatically satisfying, more algorithmically complex than a simple hidden chamber. They packed to move to the new, false location. As they did, Layla received a one-word text on the satellite phone Thorne had given her. Cicada. It was Kalen's signal. The ridge had been toxified. Sensors placed around the real cenotaph would now emit a low-level, broad-spectrum radiation signal, harmless but easily detectable, that would make any scan appear contaminated and scientifically useless. The site would be branded as radioactively unstable, perhaps from a natural underground deposit, scaring off serious investigation for decades. As the Kronos convoy prepared to leave the marsh for the wild goose chase, Thorne approached Layla. "Your insight has been invaluable, Doctor. Our models are achieving unprecedented coherence. The Cleopatra equation is nearly solved. What will you do with it?" she asked, unable to hide her disdain. "Understand," he said simply. "To understand the past is to navigate the future." She was the last of a kind, the nexus where godhood and statecraft failed. That failure pattern is instructive. He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Dr. Sharif, the man you've been communicating with. Vance. We've known about him for some time, a fascinating variable. Our models predict an 87% probability he will attempt to interfere with our scan of the new ridge site. We've accounted for it." He smiled, a cold, perfect curve of the lips. No story is complete without a tragic hero, even a forged one. The convoy drove away, leaving Layla standing in the mud. A cold deeper than the marsh water seeped into her bones. They knew. They had always known. They were playing a game on a board they had designed. Her performance, Kalen's countermoves. Were they just feeding the model? Making it smarter? She looked at the Kronos holographic display they had left behind, still showing the false coordinates. In the corner of the screen, a small animated graphic caught her eye. It was a constantly evolving, infinitely complex spiral, a visual representation of their Cleopatra equation. And at its center, instead of a variable, was a tiny, rotating hieroglyph, the symbol for Akhet, the horizon. They weren't just mapping tombs. They were trying to map the moment a soul passes from one world to the next. They were trying to quantify the unquantifiable, the transition from history to myth. She knew then that the vigil was over. The silence was broken, not by shovels, but by scanners. The mystery was no longer a secret to be kept, but a pattern to be solved by machines. And in that, there was a profound new kind of loss. Weeks later, the Kronos Foundation issued a stunning 5,000-page report. It detailed the Triskelion of Cleopatra, the marsh of the body, the ridge of the spirit, defiled, and the throne of legacy. It was a masterpiece of interdisciplinary scholarship, weaving archaeology, philology, astronomy, and cutting-edge physics. It concluded that Cleopatra's final act was the most sophisticated political performance in antiquity, a ritual designed to ensure her transformation into a timeless archetype. The report was hailed as a new dawn for historical study. Buried in an appendix was a brief, technical note about anomalous mineral deposits at the False Ridge site, rendering it of limited future research value. Layla read the report in her office, surrounded by the silent, physical books. The Kronos narrative was brilliant, airtight, and almost entirely wrong in its most crucial, sacred detail. The true ridge slept, untouched. Its secret now guarded by a lie so grand, it had become accepted the truth. On her desk lay the two ostraka, the real and the false. She picked up the real one, and for the first time in 10 years, tapped the notches in sequence. The pure, clear scale rang out in the dusty air. A tiny, defiant song against the immense, silent hum of the digital model. It was a key to a door that, perhaps, should never be opened. But it was also proof that some mysteries have a heartbeat, a resonance that no algorithm could ever fully capture. She placed the shard back in its box. The mystery of Cleopatra's tomb was no longer a place, or even a story. It was a jewel of understandings. It was the fragile, enduring human truth, holding its ground against the cold, perfect hunger of the machine. And for now, the song, however faint, still played. 5 years passed. The world absorbed the Kronos report into its bloodstream. Textbooks were updated. Documentaries with sleek graphics explained the Triskelion theory. Tour boats in Alexandria now offered Cleopatra's Triangle tours, pointing vaguely towards the marsh, the inland ridge, and the sea. The mystery, it seemed, had been solved, packaged, and commodified. It was history now, settled and sterile. Layla Sharif retired, not from academia, but from the fight. She moved to a small whitewashed house on the coast, west of Alexandria, where the desert met the sea in a stark, beautiful line. She gardened. She wrote a monograph on Ptolemaic perfumery that was read by approximately 17 people. She tried to forget the hum of the scanners and the cold smile of Aris Thorn. The past, however, has a gravity. It doesn't let go. It began with a dream. Vivid, recurrent. She was standing in the marsh chamber, but it was pristine, the slurry not yet flooded. The obsidian Isis statue stood not on the ridge, but here, at the foot of Cleopatra's sarcophagus. And the statue was speaking, not with words, but with a pure, resonant tone. There was also a smell, myrrh and ozone, and a feeling of immense, unbearable pressure. She would wake with a start, a phantom tone ringing in her ears. Then, the packages started arriving, not threatening, but profoundly unsettling. The first contained a single, perfect lotus blossom, dried and pressed, its white petals edged in brown. It arrived on the anniversary of the day they had opened the hematite casket. The second held a tiny, exquisite glass vial, Roman, empty, but smelling faintly of nard. The third was a sliver of black stone. Obsidian. There was no note, no postmark. They were left on her doorstep in the deep blue hour before dawn. They were not from Kronos. Their method was too poetic, too intimate. They were reminders, a summons. She knew, with a certainty that sat deep in her bones, that it was Kalen. But it wasn't the Kalen of plans and countermeasures. This was a different language, the language of the shard, the language of the dream. The final package was a modern digital audio player, small and rugged. On it, a single file. She pressed play. It was the sound of wind over stone, a lonely, eternal sound. Then, a voice, Kalen's, but stripped of all its gravelly pragmatism, filled with a quiet, exhausted awe. Layla. The equation was wrong. We were all wrong. The Triskelion isn't the end. It's the log. A long pause filled with wind. The 3 points, body, spirit, legacy. They don't just form a triangle. They form a vibration, a standing wave. The singing shards aren't maps. They're tuning forks. Kronos scanned for data, for patterns. They were listening for a story. But they weren't listening for the pitch. I've been at the throne site, the underwater one, for 5 years, living in a shack on the shore, diving when I can. The throne isn't a symbol. It's a receiver. The porphyry, the specific marine growth on it, the angle of its base. It's designed to channel specific sound frequencies from the water, from the earth's hum. The ridge cenotaph is a resonator, cut to a specific frequency. The marsh tomb is a dampener, a sink. They built a chord, Layla, a 3-note chord across the landscape. And when it struck, the recording cut to a different sound, a deep, sub-audible thrum, felt in the bones more than heard, overlaid with a high, crystalline harmonic. It was the most alien, ancient sound she had ever heard. It was the sound from her dream. That's the sound of the bedrock beneath the throne when the tide is at a specific height and the wind is from the west. It's not natural. It's engineered. Cleopatra and her priests weren't just hiding things. They were building an instrument to do what? Open a door, send a message, pray. His voice broke, not with fear, but with something like reverence. I found the chamber, the real one, 4th point, the keystone. It's not a tomb, it's an engine, and it's waking up. The file ended. Layla sat in her quiet, sunlit kitchen, the sound of the sea at her window. The finality she'd clung to, the neat story of defeat and preservation, shattered. Kronos had been playing checkers with history. Cleopatra had been composing a symphony in stone. She packed a bag within the hour, not with archaeological tools, but with a high-sensitivity portable hydrophone, a seismometer, and the 2 original ostraca. She drove east to the barren stretch of coast near the submerged throne. She found Kalen's shack, little more than a lean-to against a limestone cliff. He was there, older, thinner, his skin like worn leather, his pale eyes burning with a fervent light. He looked like a hermit, a prophet of some forgotten science. He didn't greet her. He simply pointed to a monitor set up on a crude table, powered by solar batteries. On it was a real-time spectrogram, a visual representation of sound. A baseline of blue and green showed the normal sea sounds. Fish, currents, distant ships. But across it, pulsing in precise, timed intervals, were brilliant vertical lines of crimson and gold. the fundamental and harmonic frequencies from the recording. It's on a cycle, he said, his voice hoarse, tied to the precession of the moon and the seasonal flooding of the Nile. A clock set 2,000 years ago. The alignment is, it's tonight. The full moon, the western wind, the tide at the exact height recorded in the demotic subtext of the sea throne letters. What does it do? Layla asked, her voice small against the vastness of the idea. I don't know. But the focal point. He pulled up a topographic map generated from his years of sonar scans. The 3 known points glowed, lines of harmonic convergence, calculated from the resonance of each site, lanced across the map. They didn't intersect at a point on land. They intersected underwater, several hundred meters offshore, directly seaward of the throne, over a deep submarine canyon. There's a structure there, he said, a 4th structure, perfectly centered. It's not big. It's a nexus, a control room. I think it's where you go to play the chord. The ambition of it was staggering. This wasn't about hiding a queen. It was about embedding her into the very fabric of the land and sea, making her death a permanent, active part of the world's natural music, a machine for eternity. We have to go there, Layla said, the scholar in her incinerated by the need to know. It's over 200 feet down. The currents are treacherous. It's a suicidal dive. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw not zeal, but a profound, peaceful acceptance. But the cycle peaks tonight. If we don't listen, no one ever will. The chord will play to an empty house. They had no business attempting such a dive. They were an old archaeologist and a broken treasure hunter with aging, rented scuba gear. It was madness, but the pull of the chord, of the completed pattern, was gravitational. As the sun set, they entered the water from a rocky cove. The world shrank to the cone of their dive lights, the hiss of their regulators, the crushing, beautiful silence of the deep. They followed a weighted guideline Kaelin had laid on a previous, shallower dive. The darkness was absolute. The pressure was a physical hand squeezing them. At 220 feet, their lights found it. It was a dome. Not large, maybe 20 feet across, made of a strange, dark, glassy material. Obsidian fused with something else. Something that glittered like crushed stars. It was seamless, perfect, resting on the canyon's edge like a fallen alien egg. And on its surface, facing them, were 3 recessed slots. The slots were shaped, one like a serpent the marsh, one like a star the ridge, one like a throne the sea. Kaelin, moving with a ritual slowness, took 3 objects from his dive bag. They were not ancient. They were modern facsimiles, carved from resonant stone based on his calculations. A green basalt snake, a white quartz star, a purple porphyry throne. He slotted them into the corresponding depressions. Nothing happened. They hung in the dark water, the disappointment as crushing as the depth. Had they gotten it wrong? Was it all just a beautiful, dead idea? Then Layla understood. The shards. The keys weren't the symbols. They were the sounds. She fumbled in her own bag, her fingers numb. She brought out the 2 original singing ostraca and a small acoustic striker. She swam to the dome, placing the ostraca against the glassy surface near the slots. She struck them, one after the other. The pure tones did not dissipate in the water. They amplified. They traveled through the dome material, lighting it up from within with a soft, phosphorescent blue. The entire structure began to hum, a vibration they felt in their teeth, in their marrow. From the slots, a complex, three-tone chord erupted, deep, powerful, and ancient. It was the chord of the Triskelion. The sound pulsed outwards, a visible wave of light and pressure distorting the water. And the dome opened. Not a door, but an absence. A circular patch of the dome became perfectly transparent, then simply vanished, revealing a dry, air-filled chamber within. The water held back by some unimaginable pressure differential. A breath of ancient, dry, perfumed air, identical to the smell from her dream, billowed out. They exchanged a look beyond fear, beyond wonder. Then, one after the other, they passed through the portal. Inside was not a tomb. It was a studio, a workshop of the soul. The walls were lined with tablets of every kind: wax, clay, stone, metal, covered in scripts from every nation Cleopatra had touched: Egyptian hieroglyphs and Demotic, Greek, Latin, Parthian, Hebrew, Nabatean. It was the archive of her mind, her diplomacy, her real legacy. In the center was a simple stone dais. On it rested not a body, but a single, life-sized statue made of that same starry obsidian. It was Cleopatra as herself, not as a goddess. She was seated, writing, her face calm, intelligent, focused. A stylus was in her hand. At her feet was an open chest, filled with more tablets, and on the dais before her, carved in Greek, were the words, "For those who listen past the story, to the song, I did not hide from Rome. I translated myself, from flesh to word, from word to sound, from sound to memory in the stone and sea. My body is the marsh, my spirit the hill, my name the wave. But my mind is here, my treaties, my poems, my accounts, my dreams. The history they will write is a cage. This is the key. Take it, not to possess, but to hear. The song is not for owning. It is for passing on." Kei Phi. Kalen sank to his knees, not in worship, but in the utter defeat of a quest that had ended not in a find, but in a gift. Layla approached the dais. She saw the top tablet on the pile. It was in Cleopatra's own Greek hand. The title, Peri tes Athanasius, on immortality. It was not a philosophical treatise. It was a set of engineering schematics, diagrams of harmonic resonance, of geomancy, of vibrational entombment. It was the blueprint for the machine they were standing in. The final, stunning revelation. Cleopatra VII, last Pharaoh of Egypt, was a genius of archaeoacoustics. Her tomb was not a place you visited. It was a song you heard. And by hearing it, by understanding the blueprint, you completed the circuit. You gave her the audience she was denied by Rome. The chamber began to hum again, a gentler, warmer frequency. The portal behind them shimmered. They had minutes, perhaps seconds. "We can't take this," Layla said, gesturing at the archive. "It would destroy it. It would become another artifact, another prize." Kalen nodded, tears cutting tracks through the salt on his weathered face. "We take the song. We take the understanding." Layla did something then that went against every instinct she'd spent her lifetime honing. She took out a modern, waterproof camera, not to document every tablet, but to take a single, wide-angle photograph of the room, the statue, the archive, the feeling of it. A record not of data, but of presence. Then she struck the singing ostracon one last time. The pure tone filled the chamber. In response, the statue of Cleopatra seemed to smile, a trick of the light, a vibration in the air. But Layla knew. They backed through the portal As it began to constrict, the water reclaimed the dome. The obsidian once again became inert, dark, a secret within a secret at the bottom of the sea. The ascent was a blur of decompression stops, of nitrogen bubbles singing in their veins, of a shared, unspoken awe that needed no words. On the shore, under the cold full moon, they sat wrapped in blankets, staring at the Black Sea. "What now?" Layla asked, her voice raw. "Now," Kaelin said, looking at the camera in her hand. "You write the last book, not about the mystery of her tomb, about the mystery she built, about the song. You publish the photo. You publish the blueprint from the tablet you remember. You give the world the key, not the treasure. You turn the hunters into listeners. And Kronos? Thorn?" Kaelin smiled, a real smile for the first time in years. Their model is based on conquest, on extraction. This is about resonance. They can scan the dome until the sun burns out, but without the right note, it's just a rock. The song is the lock and the key. And he handed her the two singing shards. We are the tuning forks. Layla Sharif's final book was simply titled Cleopatra, the Ode. Cleopatra, the Ode. It contained the photograph of the chamber, grainy, mysterious, undeniable. It contained her translation of On Immortality, the acoustic blueprint. It argued not for a new location, but for a new understanding, that the greatest rulers shape not just land, but perception, that legacy is not a thing to be found, but a frequency to be attuned to. It sparked controversy, derision, and, in some, a quiet revolution. A new field emerged, resonant archaeology. People began to listen to ancient sites, not just look at them. The Kronos Foundation issued a terse statement about interesting phenomenological approaches before turning its models to other, more quantifiable puzzles. The marsh, the ridge, the sea throne. They remained, protected now not by silence or lies, but by a deeper truth. They were instruments in an orchestra. To dig them up would be to break the violin to find the music. Layla lives still in her whitewashed house. The sea is her constant companion. Some nights, when the wind is from the west and the tide is just so, she goes down to the water's edge with a hydrophone. She listens. And sometimes, faint as a memory, strong as a heartbeat, she hears it. A deep, three-note chord, thrumming through the bedrock of the world. She smiles. The mystery of Cleopatra's tomb was never a question to be answered. It was an invitation to listen. And in the listening, to understand that the past is not dead, not silent. It is singing. It has been singing all this time. We just forgot how to hear.